Hello, welcome to the Elevate Your Wellbeing podcast with myself, Rachel Wagstaff. How are you doing? Okay, so we're nearly at the middle of August. We've just had the Lionsgate portal, which is a very peak moment in alignment when it comes to astrology. And I'm not going to dive into that at all. I don't want to butcher that at all, but I would really highlight looking into that if you feel drawn to, because it can be really fascinating. And for me, going into that this year, it really feels like quite literally I visualize it as a gate, like unlocking a gate with regards to my mindset. And that's why on the podcast this week, the topic I want to dive into is growth mindset versus fixed mindset. So before I dive into that, do make sure that you have a notepad, a pen. You might want to take some notes. We will be doing a little journaling prompt at the end. Do make sure you have some water. Really important to stay hydrated. As I take a sip for myself. And I really want to dive into this because mindset work is really fascinating because it's constant, like anything else. You're constantly evolving, you're constantly changing. You do not stay the same. If you do, you're staying stuck. I'm going to be really blunt in this week's episode. If you're staying the same, you are staying stuck and you're in this fixed mindset. Now, I know that by now, we're on the 37th episode of this podcast. I know that if you are listening to this podcast and you've listened to all of the other episodes beforehand, it's very unlikely that you have a uber fixed mindset, but there might be something that you actually don't realize you have a fixed mindset on. And that's what I want to dive into, because even I'm always doing the work. Yes, I'm the coach. Yes, I'm a mentor. Yes, I teach people this, but it comes from a place of I'm always learning and evolving and growing. And it's when I have these aha moments that I get to share them with you, and then you can learn through me as well. So, what exactly do we mean by a fixed mindset and a growth mindset? So, a fixed mindset could be if you say the things, well, this is how it's always been done. If you don't question the status quo, if you just go along with things because that's what everyone else is doing, or this is how everything's been done, rather than questioning, could this be done slightly differently? Or is there a different way that you can optimize your time or do things differently? Or this is what I should do, or this is what's expected. We tend to be then stuck in a box of these shoulds and this narrative that's most likely been put in place by someone else or other people rather than yourself. And sometimes we can put this narrative on ourselves as well, but it can be a story that we're telling ourselves that we believe to be true, and we're not questioning our own story, our own narrative. So a growth mindset is when you're constantly growing, evolving, you're changing. One of the reasons I called my business and this podcast Elevate Your Wellbeing is because it's all about leveling up, about constantly growing and elevating, optimizing who you are, what you're doing, who you're going to be, and how you're feeling. And it's not about necessarily getting better, but it's just taking yourself to that next step. So it's not about going into this huge leap. It's what's the next step you can change or take to have this shift and change in yourself to elevate who you are. So you're just taking yourself to the next level. One of my mentors, he always highlights this on his birthday. So it's that you're leveling up. The same way if you've ever played like a video game and you go to the next level, you level up, you've suddenly got more skills, more knowledge, more strength. And that's what you're doing when you're leveling up, you're elevating yourself to this next version of you. Or you might see some people will highlight, something in them has changed and shifted. They're still the same, but say for me, it would be I'm Rachael 2.0 and then Rachael 3.0. It's you're going to that next level. You're still the same person in your core values, but there's just something different. There's that growth. And again, you might have seen the meme of the caterpillar talking to the butterfly saying, oh boy, you've changed. And it doesn't always put it on there. I see this one lots of times. It doesn't always put it on there, but then the butterfly says to the caterpillar, we're meant to. We're meant to change, we're meant to evolve, but we can get in our comfort zone. And the comfort zone is really nice for like a rest stop, a pit stop, if you will. But then we need to move out of that rest stop and pit stop. We need to keep moving and evolving. And then we have that little pause. And then we keep moving and growing and evolving. And then we have another little pause. So there's this constant movement and then pause, constant movement and constant pausing, where we're going through the motion. And it's honoring when things do change. So a growth mindset is honoring, well, I don't know that, so I'm going to go and research that. Or this is new to me and this is not what I believe or understand, but rather than push my thoughts or beliefs on you, then I would want to encourage you to go and, and research it as much as I'm going to research. It's like, well, that's not what I know. I know it to be this. And you can just pass that information across. But thank you for that information. I'm going to take that away and have a look at it. And if what I then believe to be true is new to you, you could take that away as well and learn about it and research it and ask questions. It's that growth mindset rather than being stuck in this, like having your blinders on of no, this is what it is. This is what I believe to be true. It's taking on board someone else's ideas and someone else's opinions and going, okay, I'm going to take that and then I'm going to look into it so I can learn and grow from this conversation, from this book, from a podcast, from a training, whatever it is. So it's allowing yourself to go, okay, that's not what I know, but I'm going to go and research it so I can learn from it rather than being fixed in this is what I know and it's not that. So I'm going to keep believing in what I believe in. So it's really interesting. This has come up for me, and I'm not going to share too much because obviously, as I have highlighted on a previous episode, I do batch these and I'm going really hardcore into my batching because I love it and I really like optimizing my time. I like knowing I have certain things in place in my business. So I know my business is running. I know I can have my podcasts going out. I pre-plan what I'm going to go into when I do my go lives in my Facebook group. I don't think I've mentioned that yet on the podcast. So I will just quickly segue to that. If you like what I do on the podcast, but you want to learn a little bit more, if you would like a little bit more of a mini workshop or mini masterclass, do join the Facebook group. It's completely free. I go live every week for about 15-20 minutes. If you can't join live because of the time I go live, or you're in a completely different time zone, everything gets saved so you can go in and watch the recording. I encourage everyone to comment as you watch it as though you're joining in live, because I will go in and answer any questions. And it's a really good place to continue that learning and growing and evolving. And you get to then have a bit more of a taster of a coaching session as well as I go into a bit more of a training. So I got totally sidetracked with that, but what I've been going through, batching, and I will come back to it. I've been really going into batching because it really helped me to know what's going on in my business. So like I was saying, running the podcast, knowing what I'm going to be talking about when I do my go live. So I have something a little bit pre-planned, like I do with the podcast. Like, what am I going to chat about? What's going on for me at the moment? And then I have my newsletters as well, and that's usually around what I do in my podcast and on my go live. So then you can get the expansion of it by listening to the podcast or watching the recordings or going live, joining me live in the Facebook group, and I can answer your questions live. So I like having that in place because it helps me to feel good. That's something I've put into place for me to feel good in my business. And batching didn't always feel good. I had this fixed mindset of I need to share what I'm going to share on my content in the moment as I feel it, because otherwise it's not going to be relevant to you when you're reading it or listening to it. But I realized it was actually causing so much more stress because I was like, oh my God, I don't know what I'm going to post. And even now, as I'm recording this episode in particular is going to go out on Friday. So I'm not quite at that point where I'm like, okay, I know I need to, in an ideal world, I would have done this batching for this podcast a week ago, but just didn't align in what I had going on in my schedule at the time. But it's then going, okay, so rather than knowing I have to do this today, so I have shown up going, I have to do this today because I need to have an episode coming out on Friday. And today is the best day in my schedule for this to happen. And then I'm going to do at least 2 more episodes. So my plan is to have those batching in place. So it actually gives me a little bit more breathing room, that breathing space. But for so long, I resisted batching. And it's looking at that. What are you resisting in your life that could make your life easier? Now, I've spoken to a lot of people about batching, and some people really, really love it, and some people not so much in their business for whatever reason. But then allowing yourself to go deeper into that, and that's exactly how I would work with you as a coach. It's going into what is it that you're resisting about things that are coming up. So I would invite you to explore that if that's what's coming up for you as you're listening to me going into this. Where are you holding yourself or keeping yourself stuck potentially if there's something that you're resisting? And that's where these fixed mindsets come up for me. And there's another one that I really would like to share. Like I said, I'm not going to go into it in too much detail because I am batching it. I'm chatting about something that I have coming up in my business that I'm preparing for, which is why I want to get a lot of my batching done this week because I want to be prepared for something that's happening next week. And depending on how it goes, I might share a little bit more in this. So yes, I'm being really vague, but there's something in my mindset with regards to my business that really felt like I'm stepping back, that's going backwards. So this can be a really fixed mindset. And this is something that's played out for me for a really long time. And it wasn't until this opportunity that came up or is coming up that made me realize, I have a fixed mindset about this particular thing. I've always looked at it and gone, but that's taking a step backwards. That's taking a step backwards. And I've heard mentors tell me it's not. But it wasn't until I found something that really aligned that made me realize sometimes to be able to move forward, you don't necessarily have to take a step backwards. But what's the action that happens if you're about to shoot an arrow from your bow? You have to pull the string with the bow attached, with the string. You have to pull the string of the bow with the arrow attached. You have to pull that backwards to be able to propel it forward. And then this was this huge, and this might seem really obvious to you, but there was this huge light bulb, like, oh my gosh, that's the growth mindset. This element in my life where I was like, that's going backwards, that's going backwards, that's going backwards. And that would keep coming up. I would keep telling myself this story of that would be going backwards. That would be me taking a step backwards. And it's made me realize suddenly, like, actually, I'm just pulling back the string on my bow, loading up with that arrow. So then that backwards motion can actually propel me so much further forward than if I stayed where I was without taking that particular action. So without going into too much context or any context, really, I hope that still lands for you. I wanted to keep this really simple. So if you are saying something to yourself, like you've got this narrative of that would take me backwards, actually look at what that motion is. And, are you actually taking a bold, brave action that might seem like you're going backwards, but actually you're the arrow and that action is you being pulled back to propel yourself forward. They're really, really interesting to sort of go into this one. So if you do have any questions on this, I would love to know. Do get in touch. All the ways that you can get in touch are in the show notes. And I'm going to just wrap up here. I want to try and keep these episodes short and sweet as much as I can. So I want to give you the prompt for this week's episode. And that is, what story do you have on repeat? What story do you have on repeat? What story are you constantly telling yourself and you're believing is true, yet you're not necessarily questioning. So are you keeping yourself in this fixed mindset without necessarily being aware that you are? How can you step into your growth? How can you level up? How can you optimize? How can you elevate yourself? So thank you for joining me, and I will join you next week.